You are listening to UFO Classified.
So my skeptical mind, and that's just who I am, my skeptical mind goes to, well, yeah, of course, you've got this guy over here that's logical and reasonable, and you got this guy over here that's wearing a tinfoil hat. Of course the tinfoil hat guy's going to see a lot of stuff, right? He's like imagining it, or he's watched one too many sci-fi movies.
But it's used to help us frame hypotheses for UFO propulsion, power, stealth, weaponry.
Everything that we experience is very positive.
Sometimes the field of ufology has a short memory span.
We didn't know anything about the $22 million back then. We just kind of thought, well, this is, and I think that was the reason why they were looking for military-type people, because in the military, you work with whatever you got, no matter what the situation is, and you just kind of adapt and overcome.
What are you going to do with all this? You can't even take care of your own files and get them put into the current system, but yet you want to go collect other people's things. So what are you going to do with it? Who are you giving all this to?
It just really struck me about how the common thread seemed to be deception, but deception of human nature. So that's what I started thinking, who would these folks be? I mean, then I started thinking about the intelligence agencies, what role they could play, and what would be their motivations for getting involved in ufology.
I'm not saying that because the gimbal is not a rotating flying saucer, that means that all the UFOs are false. Not at all. All I'm doing is I'm looking at this one case, these individual cases, and seeing if there's an explanation for those. So try to, if I could ask people out there listening, don't think that I'm trying to attack your entire beliefs about these things.
Nice to be in orbit.
If I could only let you see with my eyes where I'm sitting tonight. I am in the very beautiful and peaceful home of Ann Druffle, and I'm not shaking as I say this, but I kind of am, because I'm so overcome again with emotion. There are so many times when you study UFOs and you make your way through all of the pitfalls, and you meet people that are less than desirable, and you meet people that are saints and will be remembered forever because of their bravery and their perseverance. And when I think of a woman who has made such great contributions, I can't think of another person that comes to mind who moved through things gracefully decade after decade like I can, Ann Druffle. And for me to sit here where she had these creative moments and where she pondered life on other planets and where she sat and talked to her friends that were discovering UFOs and going through this process with her, where her kids grew up, where she sat with her family. This is one of the best moments of my life. And so I wanted to start by reading a little bit of a portion from a book, and the first little part is called Sarah's Story. At noon on August 5th, 1975, my phone jangled. I picked it up hastily, for I was hurrying out the door to pick up 2 of my children from summer school. I knew my daughters would be waiting in the hot summer sun on a busy street corner, and I just didn't have time for getting involved in a drawn-out social call. My name is Sarah Shaw, she said in a soft, cultured voice. I've been phoning all over town to try to find a proper source to report an experience possibly related to UFOs. Have I reached the right place? Sarah Shaw had indeed reached the right place. As project coordinator of the Los Angeles-based UFO Information Filter Center called Skynet, I had been receiving UFO reports for 10 years. I regularly get calls unofficially referred from the local observatory, the police board, Air Force public information offices, and other sources. Although I'm still the only one of about a dozen active UFO investigators in the Los Angeles areas, my days and nights are often filled with investigating UFO sightings, identifying objects mistaken for UFOs by bewildered witnesses, preparing lengthy documented reports on the more unusual cases, and sending them to selected research organizations and scientists in the United States and other countries. Yes, I replied. Can I help you? When you've been in the UFO business as long as I have, you get crank calls as well as genuine reports. I reached into my pocket for the car keys and opened the front door, preparing for a quick getaway. What I'm about to say happened a long time ago, Sarah's gentle voice continued, 22 years ago to be exact, and I don't even know if it has anything to do with UFOs. As you read further into this book, you can read very important encounters with people coming forward. This book is the Tioga Canyon Contacts, and it was authored by Anne Druffle and her co-author, D. Scott Rogo. And this is a book about the shocking true encounter of legendary UFO encounters. The research that went into this book is legendary. And tonight, as I'm sitting here in a chair that Anne probably sat at, let's hope, I'm sure she did, I feel as though her energy is moving through me. And as I mentioned, this is such a great moment for all of us. I have been granted, thanks to her wonderful daughters, to be the caretaker of her legacy. And for me, I take no greater joy than to make sure her voice is remembered, to make sure that her files, her work is shared with the public. And that is so important because, as you know, and I say this on every show, at every turn, UFO archives are being either thrown away or they are being bought up by nefarious organizations that take them and store them in the darkest recesses because they want to rewrite UFO history. And I will tell you tonight, thanks to the kindness of Allis and her sisters, we will make sure that that does not happen. This is a big moment, and not just for me, for all of us. And so I want to just share my gratitude. Thank you. And you guys, this is beautiful. So I want to just start off actually by reading the obituary, and I did this on another show, but I want to read a little bit about Anne Druffle for those of you who are new to the field, and I know there are a lot of you out there. Anne Druffle was a devoted wife for 48 years, a loving mother of 5 daughters, an author and researcher for 60 years. She was an early icon of a strong woman inside and outside the home. She was born in Riverside, California, the youngest of 3 daughters to William McElroy and Eileen Wash McElroy. At the age of 3, the family moved to Long Beach. Anne's childhood was happy despite the family and country struggling through the Great Depression and World War II, which she reported as being very frightening to live through, and we're going to hear a little bit more about that tonight. She was a devoted Catholic. At an early age, she had an instinctive love of the natural world that is evident in her work. She focused her college studies on astronomy, but found math requirements daunting. I think I can relate to that. She graduated with a major in sociology and a minor in philosophy. There's so much more here, and I'm going to be posting her obituary because she's such a she had so many layers to her. But there's one thing in here I specifically want to read here because I think this is so beautiful. She was a natural outdoorsy type. She loved to hike, walk, swim, and sunbathe. Her appetite for books was famous, and it was not uncommon for Anne to read 1 or 2 books a week. Her love for God and the cosmos was intertwined. In looking up at the immense night sky, she would see proof of God's work. Who else but God could create such an amazing universe, she often asked. You really can't say much more than that. So, what a beautiful woman, and I'm very privileged to have her daughter, Allis Druffle, here tonight, who is an amazing woman as well, a strong woman. She is an environmental advocate and a classical singer, so I think we have something in common there. Since 2009, she has served as the Southern California Outreach Director for the Californian Interfaith Power and Light, an organization that works with houses of worship on renewable energy, energy efficiency, and policy advocacy. Prior to this, she served as the Director of Community Services at Holy Family Catholic Church in South Pasadena, where she gave many presentations on the intimate connection between the climate crisis and other major social issues, such as food insecurity, resource conflicts, immigration, and human trafficking. Her main priority is to help create a massive global transformation to renewable energy sources. As a classical singer, she's director of music at a local church and often uses the art of song for environmental education. So, Alice, I thank you for being here. This is just, I can't even express to you how grateful I am. And your mother is such a strong woman, and as you know, women in this line of work, it's a very male-dominated field, and so to have her as an inspiration for new women coming into that is amazing. So thank you.
Sure, thank you for having us.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to talk a little bit about your memories as a child and growing up with this very strong and unique woman.
Great. So I would say that all children have unique experiences as they're growing up, but I would say that my sisters and I had very, very unique experiences growing up. You mentioned that my mother would receive calls from, they were referred from the LAPD or the Griffith Observatory or local authorities, and people would call at all times, day or night, and they would say something like, I want to report a UFO, and we would say, hey, Mom, it's a possible sighting. And it was always kind of interesting. I remember so clearly, there was this one gentleman. It was a Saturday night, and it was probably about 9 p.m. I was allowed to stay up because it was Saturday. I was probably 8 or 9. The phone rings, and being the youngest, they said, hey, Alice, get the phone. So I picked up the phone, I said hello, and there was a man. He said, yeah, I think I see some little green men in my backyard.
Oh, dear.
For the phone. Said, hey, Mom, it might be a crazy one. But, so she would come, but, God bless her. She was really great. She was very respectful to anyone who reported a UFO. And she would spend the time listening to them. And not everyone was like that who called on the phone. I remember another very, very vivid memory. My mom mainly researched UFOs.
Right.
But she also researched parapsychological phenomenon. So her name was out to many people who wanted to report or to give her evidence of things. So my best friend Robin and I came to the house. We were like 10. And both of us remember that my mom said, hey, girls, you want to listen to a recording purportedly of a person that has passed away. But it was a recording of someone who had died. And
it doesn't get much better than that.
we're like 10, and I just remember so vividly. We're sitting at the kitchen table, and I hear a voice, and it says, it's so cold in here.
Wow.
And that was supposed to be someone who had died. And Robin and I looked at each other, and I was a little bit afraid,
Yeah.
Yeah. Growing up in the house, my mother was so incredibly open. She was given this, this gift of listening to whoever called and whatever story. She was not afraid. She was not afraid of apparent, voices from the grave. Where I was 10 years old, and I said, Mom, I don't want you to talk about UFOs or ghosts because I'm kind of afraid. And she said, "Don't be afraid, honey. If there are ghosts in this house, they're friendly." So, yeah.
That is so wonderful. And I mean, I love the fact that she was so open, and what a wonderful childhood. I know that she had a sighting when she was very young, and that 1945. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. And she talked about this up until the end of her life. It really, I think, cemented her desire to want to know more because it was such a startling experience. It was in 1945, and she was coming home from work, and all people, because of the war, and because most men were away at the war, mothers and daughters and women went in full force into the workforce to keep the economy going. She was coming home, and she got off the bus. This was in Long Beach. She was looking to the south by southwest at a very large, silvery craft. She said it was the size of a very, very bright Venus. Very bright. The thing is, it didn't move in the sky. She didn't know what it was. And after a while, she called her mother, and she said, "Mom, come in and look at this." Her mother came and looked at it, and she said, "Oh, it's a weather balloon." And she went back in the house. But it was not a weather balloon. It stayed in the sky, and then after about almost an hour and a half, my mom described that it started giving off pieces of itself. But they didn't fall down to the earth. They just came out. And she got so scared because she had no idea what it was. She called her mother again, and her mother said, "I'm making dinner for your father. I can't come out." She was very objective, So my mom was very scared, and she went into the house. But she did witness it for about an hour and a half. They didn't have the term flying saucer back then. They didn't have flying saucers in the mindset of the American people.
Right.
So it was kind of unprecedented for her. She didn't know what reality to put it with.
And that must have, obviously that had such an impact on her. And I know that in her later interviews, she felt that, that there was something that was perhaps coming down and monitoring activity. What do you know about how she felt about the activity? Or because it seemed like her initial thought process on things evolved as she grew in her research.
Right, and she did know that this was shortly before the dropping of the bombs at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It was probably in July, and the first one was dropped on August 6th, which was yesterday, and which is the 75th commemoration of that tragic event. She thought later in life that maybe it had something to do with our development and our testing of atomic weapons. And she also thought that after experiencing the UFO phenomenon for so many decades, that the original craft that she saw might have been like a mothership. And the pieces of itself were the smaller craft. That's a possible.
Right.
That's her theory, her working theory.
And then, thank you for sharing that. It's interesting, and I know for myself, and I know your mom, I could watch her through the years. It's like you develop so many different thoughts and feelings, and you learn more, like I've learned about Skinwalker Ranch, and then my whole narrative is shifted, and I'm sure in 10 years it will shift again, and it's just, she had so many different layers, like I said in the beginning, to everything that she was thinking about. She had a spiritual aspect to things, and like you mentioned, she was looking into parapsychology, which I think is an important thing to do. And for me, that is something I've always studied as well and looked at, because I don't know where one thing begins and the other leaves off, and nobody does. I don't know how we can't put things into boxes, and I think that it's all fascinating. And when you look at too, and I'll have to talk to you about this over dinner. I'm so excited, but you see the same characters that intermingle between both fields, and it's interesting to watch them over the years as well.
Right. And you had mentioned her faith and her spirituality.
Yes.
My mom was a very, very, very strong Catholic. I would say, for those familiar, she was more like a pre-Vatican II Catholic, where it's like pay, pray, and obey. But she had a very, very progressive idea, because she was brought up in the tradition of the Immaculate Heart community in Los Angeles. But my mom was very, very strong up until the end of her life. But she wanted to make sure that studying UFOs and studying parapsychological phenomenon was not, going against Catholic tradition, because I would say her Catholicism trumped anything else. So she did have quite a few talks with various Catholic priests, and especially when she was writing her book, Past Lives, Future Growth, which has to do with reincarnation, she went and talked to Monsignor English, who she really respected. He was wonderful Monsignor at St. Andrew's Church in Pasadena. And she said, "Is this okay that I'm going into this?" And basically he said that Catholic theology does not prohibit people from studying reincarnation. So she, with great relief, went on and, wrote the book, which is fascinating. One of the chapters in Past Lives, Future Growth has to do with D. Scott Rogo, with whom she wrote Tujunga Canyon Contacts. He was very sadly and tragically murdered in the 1980s. And one of the chapters actually has to do with D. Scott Rogo and a possible connection to a prior life that he had.
Wow. And so, and I wanted to, because he was such an interesting man who met tragic ends, and how did they first get into contact with each other?
I believe that D. Scott Rogo got in touch with my mother. He knew her reputation. And she had been interviewing Sarah Shaw and doing a lot of work for the basis of Tujunga Canyon Contacts. And I believe that he got in touch with her, and they just decided to write this book together. This was her first book. She knew of his reputation as well as a very respected UFO researcher. And so they just formed this wonderful partnership that produced, I would say, one of the first books written about solid kind of experiences of the third kind.
How interesting. And he was such an interesting man. I mean, a lot of thought going on in his work, and he had critics, and for him to be tragically murdered, they never found the murder suspect from my understanding.
Yeah, I would have to read back in the history of what happened with that.
That's very tragic.
They have a couple of very strong suspects.
Yeah, that whole story is something that I wanted to look into, and I believe it's my understanding that he's related to Jeffrey Mishlove, but I don't know. I just kind of stumbled on that the other day, so that'll be fun to look into. So many, like I said, so many connections that weave through both communities. It's been fascinating for me. So your mom, when she started, and she obviously, because this is, I think for some people, there are spiritual implications. People are definitely trying to get more information, about that. And they come into this. And right now I see in the UFO community, there's a very interesting split where you have people that are saying the UFO phenomenon it's an angel or it's a demon, and there's a big push towards that sort of thing where they're almost using religion to instill a sense of fear, another kind of a control system. And so did your mom ever contemplate, did she ever feel fearful, or was it more of that she was asking to, I don't know. I mean, tell me about that, because that is such a powerful thing for people.
I would say my mom was extremely objective and always took a scientific, objective view of the UFO phenomenon and people that came to her that purported to have had direct experiences with aliens. She always kept it on an objective, scientific viewpoint. And I never saw my mom fearful of the UFO phenomenon or anything that was reported to her.
That's great. And that's wonderful. And I think that's really important that, again, like I said, I see this push, and I'm not quite sure where it's coming from, but it really is, there's this big, almost like a cult-like mentality that's building, saying that, the apocalypse is coming and the UFOs have been sent here. And it's fascinating to see the different ideas that spread about in ufology, especially right now, I think, when the world is in turmoil, like we've never really seen before. And so people are playing, or groups are playing on people's fears with regard to that. And the UFO community is one of those places that it's ideal to seed ideas and to see where the narrative is pushed and things. So it's right. Fascinating.
She did, because we had discussions about this, and we would watch a lot of the UFO shows that weren't as scientifically based, and she would say, "I just don't believe that." She would say, "No." And also, when people just flat out asked her, "Anne, do you believe in UFOs? And do you believe in Roswell? Do you believe that alien bodies were retrieved?" She would say, "I want to see a body or a craft."
That pretty much rocks.
Yes. And, there are coming out more reports of people that actually, swear that they have seen a body or a craft, and they have no agenda, apparently. But my mom pretty much stayed objective. When and if we progress in the UFO field, and, maybe disclosure, we can talk about that maybe after the break more. Yeah. I would be very sad because she wasn't here to see these things, right. But she remained objective, just like a lot of her fellow researchers.
And I think there is something to be said for that. I was talking to Chris the other day, because I was mentioning Gordon Lohr, who's a dear friend of ours. We get to see him tonight and hang out. I'm so excited, not to make any of you jealous, but it's going to be cool, and I'll take pictures and share with you. But there was a standard back in the NICAP days, and people really took this seriously. And they showed up to investigate things, and they were dressed to the nines. They were presentable. They carried themselves in their demeanor was something that you just don't see nowadays, unfortunately, in the field. And that's why I think it's kind of devolved into the chaos that we see. But your mom was one of the first investigators in NICAP, and that is incredible on many levels. Tell us about that and how that first evolved and how she got in touch with NICAP and became an investigator.
I was born in the 60s, so I can't speak to the full thing. However, it is very interesting that she did have the sighting in 1945. It remained with her. It just spoke. It just spoke with her. And we all have an experience of something that we come across that's just like, this is it. Aside from her family, the subject of UFOs was it. So starting in 1953, with her marriage, she had 5 children. So really her early years in the UFO field were her early years of raising children. So she was this, as you read from her obituary in the opening, she was an excellent example of a strong woman that was raising children in a strong home with a strong family, and our father was wonderful, but also had this amazing avocation. So part of the process was this experience that stayed with her, and then between 1947, when Roswell hit, to, I would say, 1953, it kind of exploded in the minds of the American public. She read everything. We have books from the 40s that she read, from the 50s that she read. She was a voracious reader. So I believe that most of it was the reading, the taking in of this new phenomenon that was hitting the globe, late 40s, 50s, children till the mid-60s. And she joined NICAP in the early 1960s. She was excited to become a field investigator, because I can imagine that, wow, if someone had come to her and been a field investigator for her 1945 incident, and what did you see, where was it, how long did it last, She wanted to be that resource for other people so that they could tell their amazing story. And so she was a field investigator. She was strongly involved with NICAP, Los Angeles. One of her best friends was Ida Bell Epperson, who you mentioned on the June 19th podcast with Gordon Lohr and Jan Aldrich. Ida Bell called all the time to the house, and as soon as we heard Ida Bell's name, we'd say, "Mom, it's Ida Bell," and she would go into her little cubby hole, my mom, underneath the stairs, because that was the only place for an office in the house at that time.
Wow.
Because there were 7 people living here. They would stay on the phone for 2 to 4 hours, just as excited as could be.
I can relate to that.
Yes, that's right. She would have loved to have spoken with you. And,
I would have, yes.
The only thing missing on this podcast right now is my mother and her physical body, but I know she's with us.
Yes, I do too.
And so is my father. So she was very happy to be that resource of the field investigator. And my dad was so supportive of her. He would drive out to some of these investigative, the places where they happened. He would help her with the tape recording. He would help her with the notes. Not all the time, but he would when he could. And so I remember going out on a couple of these field investigations.
Oh, wow.
As a tiny kid.
Wow.
Yeah.
That must have been something.
And then, of course, they would, NICAP would get together and go to different houses. A lot of times it would be the house of Ida Bell Epperson, and they would host amazing guests like James McDonald, which we can talk about after the break.
Yes.
And so it was just, raising 5 children was not easy, but she was really good at it. And I think the UFO research was just a bright spot. It was her family and UFO research.
And that is so wonderful that she had a supportive family with all of you and her mate, because this can be a very lonely field, and it takes a lot for people to actually. I mean, I look at Chris, who has been so patient, and he had his own experiences with Skinwalker, but the UFO world was never a part of his world. And it's been interesting to see him come into it and say, have his reservations, but at the end of the day, he's been so kind and supportive and rolls with it, which is, that takes a special person to do that, because it is it's a strange topic. Right. It's wonderful. And I have learned so much about life, just studying this, and people and bad behavior and, unlimited possibilities, all these things. I couldn't think of a better topic to enrich my life. It's been fascinating.
I love that saying, love me, love my dog, for
Yep.
people who love their dog. So if you have to be in their life, you have to love their dog. And it was the same, like with you, Erica, and my mother. You love me, you have to love what I do.
Right.
Or at least accept it. You don't have to love it, but you have to accept that it's part of my life.
See, and I love that. She owned it. She had an experience when she was a child, and most people, I find, that gravitate towards this, and most people that are listening to the show tonight, they've had experiences, and it's been something, it happens that people have this question and they follow things throughout their life, and it can be a very negative thing if you get involved with the wrong groups of people. But like for your mother, because she was involved with such a great, wonderful, group of people, you can see some of the photos, where they're dressed to the nines and they are having a great time together. And some of the people that, it must have been absolutely fascinating to be at a cocktail party or to be at a NICAP meeting back in the day. And so,
yes,
sorry.
I agree. And I've seen some of those pictures, and there's 20 people there. And they're all committed, scientifically oriented. They just want the truth of what's happening there, because they all knew that a majority of sightings can be explained. But there's that 5 to 10% that you cannot explain away.
Right.
And 5 to 10% reported by, like I said, people with no agenda, people that don't want publicity, people that are in the military or in professional, or just very, very solid people, and you just can't explain what they saw or what they experienced.
And that's always been so fascinating to me too. And it's sad that sometimes there are people that have these wonderful experiences or frightening experiences, and they're just looking for a person to share. And sometimes they don't even share these experiences with their spouse. And you can have a traumatic or a mind-boggling event like that, and you carry that all of your life. And that's so, it's sad. And now, unfortunately, because the field is so polluted, and social media has done, I think, in a lot of ways, a big disservice for that and protecting people, that it really, you have to find a special person and a safe place to share your experience with now. And so it's changed, but I love that about your mom. And so tell me about, back in the days when she was hanging out with everybody at NICAP, who were some of the people that were in her circle? How did James Mcdonald get in there?
Oh, yeah. So I was a tiny child, but I've heard a lot of the stories and know a lot of, and read all of her books. So Idabelle Epperson, Marilyn, I can't remember Marilyn's last name, but she was huge. And
comments from the
they would get together occasionally and talk about all of these sightings and everything. Rex Heflin,
mm-hmm.
when he had a sighting in 1965 and took the 4 famous photos, of course that came to the attention of NICAP. And this happened in Santa Ana, so they just embraced him quickly. And if you can imagine, like, all of these, early researchers just welcoming Rex Heflin, wanting to hear his story, bringing it up. It got the attention of James E. Mcdonald. So Dr. Mcdonald came and visited a few times to NICAP. And my mom, in her book Firestorm, outlines one particular amazing meeting with Rex Heflin. And they even went out to the site where Rex Heflin viewed this. And I believe where he viewed it, I mean, it doesn't exist anymore. It's part of Irvine and part of this huge development. And I can imagine being like a fly on the wall, just hearing the conversations. So NICAP would become aware of major sightings, and these sightings that could not be explained away easily. It would surround the viewer, the experiencer, and give them voice. So that's how, some of these really came to the forefront. And then, of course, a lot of the people would write articles about that for the publications, the UFO publications at the time.
Wow, and so let's talk about Firestorm, because to me, I mean, that is an important book, and everybody that's listening to the show has to get Firestorm. But I would dare say that I think most people that are listening, I'm sure Scott Brown, and I want to just give him a shout out, who has been wonderful at making beautiful graphics for me. And also Mario, I know that they have Firestorm in their collection because it is such a pivotal book, and it captures the essence of Dr. James McDonald so beautifully. And he was I wish I could have met him. He sacrificed so much and came up against so much ridicule in his professional career that it was very hard on him, as you and I were talking about before, and ultimately led to his tragic death that was lost to the world. But talk a little bit about how Firestorm got started and what the learning process for your mom was. And I know Gordon's in there, as well. So just tell us about that. It's fascinating, wonderful.
Right. My mom was granted unlimited, exclusive access to all of Jim McDonald's UFO material, all of his notebooks, all of his pictures, all of the files, the notes from Project Blue Book, when he visited Project Blue Book, I think 3 times. She was granted that, don't hold me to this, I believe from 93 to 96. And she had 3 years to look through all of his files. She visited his home in Tucson, became quite close with his wife, Betsy McDonald. Betsy was just a wonderful woman. And after 3 years, she wrote for 3 years.
Wow.
And it took her 3 years to put all of these ideas. I mean, if you can imagine Jim McDonald, this incredibly respected atmospheric scientist from the University of Arizona, Tucson, he actually had, as many of your listeners know, his own UFO experience where he saw something. This was in the 1950s. And being a scientist who studies the atmosphere, it just was natural. It was like, what is that? What is that? Can I explain that? He was an incredibly intellectual, cerebral man. It seems like his mind went a million miles a minute. It was like his mind was a computer. And it was processing information all the time. And he was a voracious reader like my mother. So he had this experience in the 50s. He privately investigated UFOs. He did not want to come out publicly. But he kept, journals and things like that for about 10 years. And then 1967, 68, he came out publicly. his main goal was to have science take the UFO questions seriously. All he wanted was serious science put at the UFO question for these, 5 to 10% of cases that could not be explained. And him, with his expertise, could explain a lot. Who but an atmospheric scientist can say, yeah, that's this, and I don't know if science just was not ready, but because of his involvement, his study, more scientists did come forward to study it, and more scientists, I would say they didn't come out publicly, but there were a lot working behind the scenes. And he was just a fascinating character. I think that the book Firestorm should be read by every single person who is especially studying UFOs now with everything that's coming out, which we'll probably talk about more after the break. And it will prove what Jim was trying to do 55 years ago. It will be a continuation of the scientific study.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
I think it's been fascinating to me to see the parallels and to see, that decade after decade, there's been a push for disclosure. And as I look at it now, I wonder, especially with the disclosure, quote unquote, now, I don't think, for me, that doesn't feel genuine. It feels like another push to distract and to take power away from people. And it's really interesting. I'll talk to you a little bit more about that. And we will take a little break so we can freshen up and get some water and things, because this is just, I'm so glad I get to talk to you all weekend about this so and much. Just share that one. And I want to do some video interviews with you as well, and just, watch you look at different files and then share with people. I mean, the beautiful view where I'm sitting right now, and some of these, I want people to experience her. And I think that it's so cool. And like I said, I'm almost tongue tied, because this is one of those moments in my life that will always mean a great deal to me. It is what, when you go through all these slams and things in the field of ufology, a moment like this makes everything worthwhile, and it gives you that gumption to keep going. I sound like, I don't know, that gumption, I sound like my grandma, but but it does. It's beautiful. And to know that somebody like your mom and Dr. Mcdonald and Gordon Lohr, all these people, they were so dedicated to that, and they were so, you could look at what they were saying and you took it seriously. And it wasn't, like they were storming Area 51 or wearing a tinfoil hat. This was a subject of merit, and they were going to do what it took to make sure people understood that. And that is a very rare and beautiful thing in this topic. And we'll go to a break in a little bit, but you had a bit of an interview. Do you want to play that, or should we do it after the break with Mcdonald?
Yeah, I have a short interview with James McDonald's voice, and you'll be able to hear from the way he speaks. He speaks very fast. I think it's because his mind went very fast. But it's, I will let you listen to it.
Yes, and I'm hoping for people at home that you can hear the audio, and if not, I will just give you a little heads up that we will definitely post that and make that available. We'll play that right now.
There is evidence that the American government wanted to stifle debate about UFOs. They set up a committee to objectively investigate UFOs, but a leaked memo revealed that the whole investigation was a sham. The government's most vocal critic was the top atmospheric scientist, Professor James Mcdonald.
Why has the government taken this attitude, in your opinion?
As a result of the extremely heavy wave of sightings in 1952, the CIA and Air Force became so concerned over the sheer number of reports that were tying up American intelligence channels that they wanted to get this signal out of the system, asked the Air Force, the CIA asked the Air Force for a debunking policy. The literal wording was to debunk the flying saucers, to decrease public interest in the UFOs. Regulations were promulgated very shortly that made it a crime punishable with, I think it's $10,000 fine and over 10 years in prison to release any information at airbase level on UFOs. And as a result of that, nothing resembling any scientific investigation has been going on in the past 15 years.
That sums it up, doesn't it?
Exactly. And that's what he fought against the rest of his life, and what is coming to the fore now. So we'll talk more about that.
Yes, I'm excited about this. What a beautiful moment. And I want to just give a shout out to Mario, who is my right-hand man. I couldn't do the show without his love and support, and I want to give his family my blessings. They lost a very special person, very special dog yesterday, and I know how much how hard that is, and so I just want to give him my love and his family. And I want to again thank all the people who support my show. I get contacted from people from all over the world, and it is so neat to see how people are wanting information. They want credible sources. They understand that there are games at hand, and they understand that we have to dig deeper than what is being presented by large organizations. There's something there. And with all of us working as a team, we are all going to get there, I have no doubt. And before we go to break, again, I want to just thank Allis and her sisters for giving me the honor of preserving their mother's work. I had a moment before I set up for the show, and I got to walk around and see some of the beautiful things that I am in charge of getting out to the public, and I just have to say, chills are going up my spine. I am glad I was wearing a mask because my jaw was on the floor and it was probably a little awkward. But anyway, we're going to take a break. There won't be any music because we're, again, my prowess at the producing, but we're going to take a 5-minute break. So, watch that little dial. We will be back after the break, and we look forward. And I will be, Michael, thank you for being here the first time. And if you have questions, I will definitely get them asked. I just can't type because the keyboard is right under my mic. And obviously I'm walking on a precarious balance here tonight with my audio, but thank you so much. We will take a break. We'll be back in 5 minutes. All right, my friends, I am Erica Lukes, and this is UFO Classified. I want to, again, thank all of the people that support the show. You are the reason that I'm here, and we are creating a great community from all over the globe, a community of people that have a like mind, that want dedicated, thorough research, and we are going to make sure that change is taking place, and little by little it is, and I am grateful. We all know that there are things taking place in the UFO community that are not right, that it is tainted, it is created to steer a narrative and to distract us, and nothing speaks more about that than Skinwalker Ranch, as we know through a series of exposés that I have done over the past year with Chris Marks, my husband, and former Bass security guard and investigator for Bigelow Aerospace. And so I encourage each and every one of you to make sure when you're going out there to find good material and in solid work that you're not looking to the brightest and shiniest thing. You have to go back, you have to research the history of the subject, and that history will provide a wonderful an important background for each of you, so you can see the way people kind of infiltrate the community. You can see the way that it's just all fascinating. All I'm saying, because I want to get back to Allis, but I just want to say, just be careful and do your due diligence and make sure you really pay attention to some of the shows and the people that I'm putting forward, because as much as sometimes I can be a little harsh to shine a spotlight on things, I'm doing this because it's important for the subject, for the history of the subject. It's important to move forward with a really focused and a mindset where we can look through some of these things so we can now make breakthroughs. And I am grateful to Allis Druffle for having me in her mother's home. And I'm sitting here in a room with great people. I'm looking forward to seeing Gordon Lohr tonight, who introduced both of us. And I'm so grateful for Gordon. He's a love, but it's been, I'm grateful. And like I said, before in the first hour of the show, I feel like all of the negativity, it's been such a difficult thing for me in this, and to have a bright spot like this will keep me going for another 50 years. and I can, just looking at the work that your mom has done, looking at her handwriting, looking at the boxes of cassettes, and wow.
I think it will take about 50 years for you to actually go through all the wealth of the material that my mother kept, which is considerable. I was fully expecting you to run out screaming out the door.
Nope.
After looking at all of this.
No, I was just passed out for a moment, and now I'm back up and ready to rumble. But it's so, I don't know. It's like and to me, and I want to bring this up before we get back into some things that you want to talk about, but I think this is really important with different groups. There are a handful of groups that are now trying to buy the data. They're trying to sweep it up, and they use data. And so all of these case reports, all of these people like your mother who have been researching for years, it's like these organizations or small groups want to just sweep that out, and they're not looking at what the archives are, because this is you pick up this envelope. This is a person. This is an emotion. This is a snapshot of time. This is a subject where people like your mom and Dr. Mcdonald had to endure so much that it's just, I don't think of this as this is important. This isn't just somebody sweeping stuff up and then crunching the data and throwing it away in a basement. This is preserving the legacy of not only the witness of different cases, but the person who put their time into this subject. And I think that's why I encourage all of the people that are out there, if you have people, local researchers, if you can reach out to them, and if they have an archive that is in peril, please, do your due diligence to try to save that so we can I'll move forward together and learn from what other people have done and make this a better field. So anyway, thank you for letting me say that, but it's important. And so, yeah. So let's talk about, you've got a book in your hand right now, and I can't see it from here, but it's looking good.
Well, I don't want you to faint.
Well, it wouldn't be the first time today.
This is the original Condon report.
Okay.
The copy that James McDonald read, owned, notated, made personal notes on.
Oh my gosh.
So I'm handing it to Erica right now so she can take a look at it.
Thank you.
It's by the University of Colorado. Wow. And everyone out there, we are 6 feet apart, so we are physically distanced. And when we're not, we're wearing masks. So in case anyone was thinking. Yes. So like what you said, Erica, to handle these things and to touch these things, there's a person behind that. There's an emotion behind that. So if you can imagine James reading this, his mind going 1,000 miles an hour, and just digesting this. And it's a very, very, very lengthy, how many pages are in it? 400 or 500? We have the small paperback version of it. And he has each chapter, he has areas where he disagrees, he has notes. And this was actually his, and you can imagine the emotion that was pouring through his body when he was reading this book.
I will post a picture of this just so people will know what I'm holding in my hand, and it's wow.
Yeah, so that's great. So I was hoping to talk a little bit more about James Mcdonald.
Yes.
So he really is a man who was relevant to his time, and he's very, very relevant to our time.
Right.
My mother not only wrote Firestorm, she also wrote a script called A Man Without Wonder. So she has a script based on his life as well. It was one of her great desires to have this script be produced into a movie that was seen all over the world in her terms. And we're hoping it still can. So if you're a producer and you want to research this, just contact Erica.
Yes, and I do have a couple people.
So people want to see relevance in these times. And he stood for science. He stood for science in what people considered a fringe subject, but he wanted to bring the science to this. And at this point in our history, I think that in some areas, science has been debased or just put to the side.
Right.
In very, very crucial, important social movements that we're going through right now. We have to stay honest to science, and this doesn't have to do with UFOs, but I am an environmental advocate.
Right.
I work with the faith community. We're very scientifically based. And, for 30 years, there were organizations set up that were based on pseudoscience that kept the reality of climate change from the American people and from other countries, but really America is kind of behind the globe when it comes to the acceptance of science of climate change. That is changing, and it's really changed in the last 10 years. But that's just one example of where science needed to be honored right away. But it's put to the side mainly by, corporations, people, powerful people, to serve an agenda.
Right.
And it's the agenda usually based on profit motive.
Yes, yes.
So I see Jim as a man for our times, that we have to return to the scientific method. And I say that as a strong person of faith as well. But I also want to say something about Jim Mcdonald. I didn't know him personally. I would have loved to have met him. I don't know his family, so I don't know how his family experienced him. But it's kind of ironic that my mother and I were reading Firestorm, which I'm holding in my hand right now. We were on page 300 when she passed away. And I didn't really expect her. I mean, she was older. She was going to pass away, but I didn't expect her to pass away as quickly as she did. She had double pneumonia, and she just couldn't recover from it. But I'm holding Firestorm, so we were reading this together, and so we were really absorbing it. We would get together for about an hour. I would read it. I would ask her things, and I was just struck by the person of Jim Mcdonald. It seemed like he had a type of innocence that, science is science, and if you just give people the proof, that's it. Then everyone would accept it. And he had a great optimism that his work in the UFO field would be like almost as successful as his work in the atmospheric sciences, because he was an amazing scientist and put forth a lot of reports in his home field, one of which was the study of the supersonic transporters that were planned to be built in the late 60s, early to late 60s. He actually was on a congressional hearing, and he said that if you have supersonic transporters, that the ozone layer would be affected, and it would have, really deleterious effects on human life. And it turns out that 10 years later, everyone was talking about the ozone layer. And in the 90s, everyone was talking about the ozone layer. And we had the Montreal Protocols, which was an international protocol to reduce the causes of the reduction of the ozone layer. So he was a prophet in his own field. So he had like this kind of innocent view. Yeah, I'm going to show people that, these things are for real, these 5 to 10% of cases that can't be explained. And that really comes through in Firestorm. That's almost like Jim. And he had a very, very successful trip to Australia, I believe in 1967, where he talked to a lot of the Australian UFO researchers. And people were just welcoming him, and he had interviews. Unfortunately, there was misinformation that came out there that the U.S. government, the Office of Naval Research, had funded his UFO research in Australia, which was not correct. He was doing Office of Naval Research in Australia, and since he was there, he was doing these other things as well. And he always checked with his kind of supervisor of the grant from the Office of Naval Research. And he always checked in with them. Is this okay? Yes. Is this okay? Yes. So unfortunately, there was that misinformation in Australia, and then the misinformation about the government funding his UFO research was this myth that came out, especially by the writings of Phil Klass. My mom knew Phil Klass, and she was like, honey, I always try to play nice with people, even if I don't agree with them. But Phil Klass was really strong on almost kind of taking Mcdonald down.
Yes.
And maybe you know more about
well,
that.
He was incredibly nasty. I mean, why did Phil Klass do anything that he did? But, it is interesting. He had a mission, and Mcdonald, unfortunately, was his mission, and that was very sad. There's something to be a skeptic, and then it's another thing to go above and beyond to completely strip a human being of, all of the things that they've worked so hard to accomplish in other areas of their life.
Right.
And so that was one of his fortes, and that was unfortunate. And I think, like you mentioned, Mcdonald was a very sensitive, just one of those. He just kind of emoted wonder, and everybody wanted. It's sad because he had so much going for him, and that innocence, and that wanting to go down these rabbit holes and use science and get everybody involved, and that was tragic that he didn't get to live longer. Yeah. So we could have seen where that led.
And like you said, I think Phil Klass really had him in his sights because he really went after him. He had the JEM white papers that he published, and he would write to certain government contacts, like, why are you financing this UFO research? It's wrong, and, But, so Jim was incredible. He was the one, as you know, who coordinated and pushed for and encouraged the first UFO hearing in Congress. And I'm holding right here in my hand Symposium on UFOs, the hearings before the Committee on Science and Astronautics, the U.S. House of Representatives, 90th Congress, 2nd edition, July 29th, 1968. It's really, really hilarious because, as many of your listeners know, there were 6 people who spoke. Dr. J. Allen Hynek, Professor James Mcdonald, Dr. Carl Sagan, Dr. Robert L. Hall, Dr. James Harder, and Dr. Robert Baker Jr. And you notice they're all men. White men.
Well,
that's okay.
Shocker.
It's changing. Jim's section of this incorporates almost 60 pages of his testimony. And everyone else only has like 14 or 15 pages.
Well, that's good.
So Jim's like, his time in Congress took, 3 times more than everyone else's because he's just so excited by this. So he was and I'm handing this symposium to Erica right now. So he was the one that walked the halls of Congress, that met with Congress members, that kept in constant contact with them, that, back then, telephone bills got very expensive.
Right.
And his telephone bills, he talks about how expensive his telephone bills are. So that was really incredible. As we go forward into 2021, hopefully with a new administration, it is possible that we can have these types of hearings, and not just one, and then it's going to go away, but really bring this to the American attention. And my mother testifies, will say to this day, that Jim did not commit suicide because she claims his fingerprints were not found on the gun. Now, I don't know if any of your listeners out there know about cold cases and if they can follow this up, but I don't know. I wasn't there. Some people say that he was driven to this by the government, but I will say that by reading Firestorm, you will see that there was a focused attention on debunking and ridiculing Jim from the time of 1968 to 1971. And that kind of coordinated attack did lead to whatever happened. You can't say that, the CIA killed him.
Right,
I don't believe that. I
Yeah.
don't believe that. That's kind of a conspiracy theory. But being led to something and being ridiculed to the point that someone becomes overwhelmed.
Right.
That's what I'm saying. I wish that at that time there were more resources for people, and that people felt more comfortable just talking, and saying, I'm thinking about this, I'm overwhelmed, so I wish there had been resources for him, because he did not let on to his colleagues how difficult of a time he was having with the pushback.
And it's so sad. And I know that the pushback in this subject, from what I've personally experienced, is brutal. I cannot imagine what he went through, and to be so isolated, and not only that, but to have such a prestigious career and have people threaten that, that must have, I can't imagine how that must have felt. And I will say that from my viewpoint, there are people that coordinate these efforts very seriously. And I think that it's been interesting because some of my friends who are a little bit older, who have been in this subject, some of them think that there was, a real push by the CIA and the powers that be to try to discredit and ruin people. And we saw that with NICAP, and the demise of NICAP and different things. And I definitely see now with some of the people involved, with to the Stars Academy and their CIA connections and some of the things that are taking place, and then some of the bullying and targeted attacks that are being seen by some researchers that are speaking out in the field, asking questions. It's very interesting to see, and even though it's not on the same scale as someone like Mcdonald, I mean, it's still happening today, and I think people need to be mindful of that for their own sanity and their own safety, and really reach out to people that are trusted and talk about it, because it happens, and we need to make sure we're forming a tight, cohesive group around each other to protect each other now. And
I would hope that that all the people that are involved in, like Lou Elizondo and To the Stars Academy and Chris Mellon, I think that their series, Unidentified, is great. I loved it. I want to meet Commander David Fravor. He was like, oh man, when I saw that thing, I wanted to actually go down and, like, he was like going down and seeing what that Tic Tac was, right? Some people would be like, oh my God. And I would love it if all of them could read Firestorm and know the past, know all the researchers from the 50s and the 60s that were taking this really seriously, because Jim would have gone crazy if he were still here and he heard Commander Fravor's report of the Tic Tac and the fact that they have, the RF video, mm-hmm. because Jim actually was looking for several sources of evidence for each of the unidentified flying objects. Like I said, if we could take him and put him in this moment, he would be like a rock star,
and we need hopefully a better one.
and he would be able to give them the foundation that has come before. Right. Because we're kind of like right now in the same situation that we were with Jim. What's happening now and the renewed interest in scientific objective, this is what I saw and I can prove it. Here's the radar image. And the Navy says, yes, these are real images. Wait, did the Navy say that, or the Air Force? I'm sorry. But they backed it up. Right. This is what Jim was fighting for 60 years ago. That's another reason why I think he is very relevant for our times. It's the same fight.
Right. And I think, it's interesting to see, to know a little bit, doing the research that I did with, Skinwalker Ranch, and seeing that some of the same people that were involved with Bigelow are involved with Bigelow and are involved in To the Stars Academy. And for me, that, I question their motivations. And I think that they haven't, they put little bits and pieces forward, but then they say things are going to happen and they don't. And then they're buying up data and they're not giving it to the public. And they're playing games that I think, unfortunately, were happening in that time period. But maybe now, because of social media and because of the internet, it's even more brutal than it was back then. And I think it's an interesting thing to see. But all I can say is we do need a rock star like him. Yeah. We need somebody with that brilliant mind, somebody that is based in science, somebody that has contributed so much in many other areas of his life. And I don't know. I prayed that somebody like that can step forward and that we can really move this forward. But it's going to take, like I said, it's taking an effort. And I'm very grateful that I have people that are on the show right now in chat who are some of the brightest and best people putting their minds to this. Again, I'm going to mention Scott Brown, who does such a beautiful job, and I'll have to introduce you to him, but he has a Facebook group called In the Field, and they are really scientifically scrutinizing photographs and weeding through some of the nonsense, and really, it's people like that who do the underground work behind the scenes and create communities that are not putting up with things that they shouldn't have to. And then I love that there are people like that out there. And so it's one of those things.
I think that some of the people that are working for disclosure now really do have, hearts of gold.
Yes.
I'm thinking of Steve Bassett. He's really honestly devoted to this. He is putting his eggs in this basket. He's working for it. And so there are people,
yes.
there are people that are still with us. Bob Wood, for example, and all of the people that you know. There are a lot of people. I would say there is one little concern I have about this, is that as we go toward disclosure, which I think is going to happen, I think soft disclosure may be happening now. I'm part of a UFO research group in Los Angeles, and they think that some of the things that are coming out from the government are kind of pointing us towards soft disclosure. Like, putting it in the minds of people that, there are things out there that we can't explain.
Right.
But one concern I have is that as the government seriously researches this, and hopefully there are hearings, congressional hearings more like Jim Mcdonald had, the military and the government will support this type of study because of a security threat component. But sometimes that's what makes the government and the military, stand up and say, this is a possible threat here. They'll say, oh, well, if it's a possible threat, then we're going to put our resources toward it. We're going to study it, which is good. But, this may not be a threat.
Right. And do I want those people making that decision for me? If
right.
ET did land and was trying to communicate, would I want somebody who's, creating all of these things to knock people off the face of the planet? Would I want them making that decision on how to communicate with another intelligence?
Exactly. And actually, if I ever saw that happen, what I would do is I would grab camera, video, everything. I would not call the police right away.
Right.
I would not call the Air Force.
Good for you.
and I've actually thought of this, what type of communication would we have if, this were determined to be something? I don't know what it is, but I would caution, that don't just look at it from the potential threat.
Right. And I think that's really important. And I think right now, especially, everything's a threat. And I think when you look at the people that are stepping up who have connections to Boeing, who are working for, this aerospace and defense contractor, they need money. And so, there are people, unfortunately, there that it's like, oh, we're going to use this UFO thing and veil it in a threat, and then we get more funding, and great. And right now there's a big push for that sort of thing, as we know. But so it is interesting to just see those potential motivations. And I think for me, I know, your mother knew, there's something around us there, and I don't know what it is. I'm not going to put it in a box. I have no idea, but I know that I've experienced something I can't explain. And I think for me, that was an empowering thing. And the second somebody comes in and says, oh, this was, this area in the Uinta Basin is having all of these horrible things happen, and people are going home, and they're, all of these negative things that are, you get that in your mind. And then if you have a personal experience that is, like in my case, something that was very awe-inspiring, and then you have these people bombarding you with the threat, that takes away your personal power. And that, to me, is something that we just can't have happen, because it should be, this discovery process, the interaction with whatever, should be empowering at the end of the day.
Right. And the voice of Commander Fravor, for example, in one of his interviews, he said, I don't think it was of this world. Who knows? A lot of the scientific people don't want to cross that line and then say, well, is it extraterrestrial, and then alien civilizations and things like that.
If anyone could see your face right now,
right.
that would be good, because that was awesome.
But of course, as a person of faith, and this is just an aside, as a person of faith who believes that there's a creator of the heavens and the universe, if we have been visited, there are God's creation as well. But anyway, that's beside the point. But if we have people like Commander Fravor saying this, I just want to say that, the average man walking down the street that sees something like this, or the average housewife, or someone, who is average? There's no average. But you don't have to be a professional person to have an amazing experience and to be taken just as seriously as a Commander Fravor.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, and I was just hoping that we could take just a few minutes so I could describe some of the things in my mother's archive.
Yes.
And I want to say thank you, Erica. Thank you.
Thank you.
I didn't expect my mother to go right when she did. So I was thinking of archiving and where we would keep her archives. And I thought we had some time to figure that out. But all of a sudden it was like, oh, we need to archive these things. All of her UFO colleagues and her friends were so concerned that, one, they are archived, and two, that they go to a place that is legitimate, that is open to the public, and whose curator really cares about the material. And so when Gordon Lore suggested you, and I said, well, who's Erica Lukes? It was like a gift. It was almost like my mom saying, I choose Erica, okay? Knock me on the, shoulder, give him to Erica Lukes, because it just dropped in my lap. And I was like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do with this material? But I want to describe the material. It's 6 large filing cabinets, 1 gigantic filing cabinet, a gigantic wall of books, 5 bookcases of books, a treasure trove of cassette tapes, a treasure trove of handwritten materials, publications, UFO publications, some from the 50s, 60s, 70s. So it's a wealth of original material and, starting right from the beginning. So thank you. Because I did not know what was going to happen. And the fact that you care so much means it's going to be well taken care of. And I can visit you in Salt Lake City.
Yes.
Which I'm very excited about. I've never been
we've got a
Utah.
tour we're going to take you on.
That's right. But can I tell you about one particular case that my mom worked on that is not well known? And I would love to get it out. Okay. So this case involves a man named Harrison Bailey. And he later became a Reverend, so it's Reverend Harrison Bailey. So I'm just going to read a little bit, all right? I had it up. I'm sorry. Okay. In September 1951, a 24-year-old Harrison Bailey was walking from Gary, Indiana to St. Louis, Missouri, with a stop in Chicago, a journey estimated to take 5 days. He was a huge baseball fan, and on the direction of Bill Veeck, the owner of the St. Louis Browns, was pushing a huge tractor tire with the ad, "Come through in 52 St. Louis Browns." Long journeys were not new to Harrison because he had made long-distance trips to where the Browns were playing. On the second day, while near Chicago, he saw, quote, an object in the air. It looked like a water tank, shaped like a water tank they have in small towns, unquote. Harrison didn't pay much attention because he had a schedule to keep. However, 15 to 30 minutes later, something compelled him to look back. The object, which he referred to as a ship, had landed in the fields nearby. It goes on, and I believe this is on my mother's website, Druffle.com. It talks all about his experience. He's an African-American man. He got to a small town. They had seen the object as well, and they thought that he was part of like a crew, to the point that they questioned him and they asked him to take off his shoes to prove that he had normal human feet, to prove to these townspeople that he was like not an alien. And this is it goes on and on and on up until the 1980s, where he takes Polaroid pictures of an apparent entity in his apartment. He experienced this in the 50s. The experience, the whole, whatever you want to call them, followed him through, and there are pictures here. And this is such a fascinating story. Not many people know about it. I would love to have this like fictionalized or written up or like documented, like a documentary about this. Because you have the whole UFO incident, but you have the whole racial
yes.
experience of this, of him as a black man
yes.
walking through these white towns and seeing, having to take off his shoes to prove that he's human, and him actually saying okay, because you would not say no to a group of white people back then.
Right.
And
yes.
say, no, I'm not going to. So anyway, I would love to have Reverend Harrison Bailey's story retold somehow. A documentary, something. And he actually wanted that too.
Let's make it happen.
Yeah.
I mean,
that's just one of the interviews. There's pictures of my mom with Harrison Bailey. I remember him coming to the house in the 1980s. Wonderful man. Yeah. So that's just one.
I'm so excited. I feel like this is going to be so much fun to put forward to people. And I'm overwhelmed, and I'm so grateful and excited. And I can feel your mom. I mean, it was funny especially the past couple of days, it's like I've just felt your mom there. I mean, it's like this, I don't know, just this connection, and it's been very powerful. And I will say, just very honestly, I mean, a couple nights ago, I went out, we were walking our dogs, and I sat there and I looked at the moon, and I just said a prayer, just reached out, for that's the connection to your mom, so that I could try to do what's best for her and continue her work. And I know in every part of my being that there are things in those files that are going to build an incredible picture, and new things are going to come to light as a result of what we have there. And I have a beautiful space. I sent you pictures of it. It's open to the public. I have people that have come in there, and we have, gatherings. It's in a place where no light will get in, so there won't be any damage to anything. And thanks to people that have been helping me learn how to archive, who are the best of the best. I mean, this will be a fun project, and it is such a wonderful testament to your mother. This will be made available. This isn't going to be pushed aside, and it's a miracle. It's it's a blessing. I mean, this is.
Yeah, and it's a gift to myself and to my sisters, Ellen and Charlotte, and our family as well. And this is what my mom wanted: people to research the past to guide the future.
Yes.
And like I said, I believe that everything is interconnected. So it's like a circle. So a circle will go on.
Isn't that beautiful. And really, like I said, it's such a refreshing thing to have that after so much negativity. Not only, everybody's going through a time. This was a different time for all of us. And then you add in some of the, the UFO goings-ons, and it can get so negative. So this is such a beautiful thing. And kind of a hope, and hope for the future, and hope that we remember the beautiful things that people in the past have done, and carry things forward and create a sense of unity. It's really, it's profound on so many levels, and I love it. But I want to ask you a little teeny, just to talk a little bit about your mother's love of Ireland, because that is really cool. I love Ireland too, and so you told me a little bit about that, and I'm just fascinated.
Right. So that is an incredible journey and adventure for my mother. Part of this is on her website. She wrote 2 articles, and Druffle.com. So my mother's grandmother, Bridget Walsh, came to live with my mother and her family when my mother was, a lot younger, a child. And she learned a lot from her grandmother, Bridget Walsh. Bridget had escaped Ireland when she was 16 and caught a boat to New York by herself. So you can tell that she was very strong and adventurous herself. The circumstances in her home were not really good, so she left, came to America. My great-grandmother, Bridget Walsh, told my mother about Ireland. She used to sing to her a lot of the old Irish songs from Ireland that she learned when she was a child. So my mother had a lifelong just love of Irish music, and we used to listen to it. There's an Irish bar in South Pasadena we used to go to. She loves Guinness. And
who doesn't?
That's right. A lot of my
nothing
friends,
like
actually.
it, especially when you're in Ireland drinking Guinness. Right. That's a beautiful thing.
But my great-grandmother Bridget Walsh told my mother, when my mother was a child, about an Irish patriot named Robert Emmett. And there had been many patriots, revolutionaries, rebels, in the Irish society that would rebel against the English. And every so often there would be like this revolution where a lot of people would die, and unfortunately the English would, conquer them, and the Irish rebels would be, killed. That happened for several hundred years. Robert Emmett was one of them. And evidently in 1803, he led an uprising against the English in Dublin. It was successful for 3 days. But he and his colleagues were eventually caught, and they were hung and beheaded. So the thing about Robert Emmett was that his body and his head disappeared. So when my mother heard this as a child, instead of saying, "Oh, that's gross," it just stayed with her for some reason. In 1971, my mother and my aunt Teresa took my grandmother to Ireland. This was the first time for all of them, and my mother was so excited. She was running around the plane. When they were almost landing, she was like, oh my God. She saw the Irish countryside, and it was gorgeous and green. She could not get over it, and she just exclaimed out loud.
Oh, I felt the same way.
Oh my goodness. So, after that, this Irish bug just got into her. And she decided that she was going to try to find the head and body of Robert Emmett.
A small undertaking.
And she approached it through psychic archaeology. So she hired a lot of psychics. They did kind of like reading of maps. Where could he be? She became intimately familiar with Ireland, and especially Dublin, where Robert Emmett lived. She talked to historians. She read books. I mean, she wasn't the first one to try to find him, actually. There was a woman named Helen Landreth who wrote a book called The Search for Robert Emmett in 1924. She had tried to find him. My mom had 2 copies of this book, memorized it, and went on this quest. Some of it is written up on her website, Druffle.com. She ended up going to Ireland 14 times.
Oh, that's...
And she thinks she found the likelihood of where he was buried. But she faced a lot of obstacles from the Irish government for, if she wanted to dig or if she wanted to do a radar survey. She never found the head and body, but she went on this incredible adventure and learned a lot and left an amazing treasure trove for future people who would like to do this. And she was going to write a book, and this would have been an incredible book, but she never wrote the book. And so all the books and the material, if you'd like it, is yours.
Yes. And I want to go on an adventure like that.
Yes.
Sometime when the zombie apocalypse is over, we should all go to Ireland to start out at Temple Bar, have a Guinness, and go look. I mean, just
look for Robert Emmett.
What a fun adventure.
Yeah,
to do that.
I think actually she probably spent those 10 years of writing that book to writing the book of James McDonald.
What a fun life, though. I mean, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry that you've lost such a special person. But what made you look? You're living a good life if you have made so many contributions and affected so many people in a positive way. And what a fun upbringing. I mean, for you. And we're getting ready to go visit Gordon to wrap up the show, and there's so many other questions, and I will be, as we're going through things over the weekend, and I'll videotape things, and then I will get those things out there. And if any of you have questions, send me a message on Facebook, and then I will try to get as much as I can out for you, because like I said, there's so much to talk about. But I mean, when you just, think of your final thoughts on your mother, I mean, how do you feel right now about everything and the kind of a person that she was? I know the answer to that, but I want to hear it in your own words, and the kind of mark that she left in you as a strong woman who was connected to the environment, who was connected to making a positive change.
Right. I would say that I am inspired by her example. She was a strong woman. She went after what was in her heart, and she had purpose, and she knew she had purpose, and she thanked God that she had a purpose. She thanked God for her husband, and she thanked God for her 5 children every night in her prayers. And I am praying that I am as successful in my purpose as she was in hers. And all of her daughters are the same way. We all had strong purposes. And my sister in Florida, she is amazing. The gift of healing that she does, the gift of being a mother. She's an incredible mother. She's a physical therapist, and she just has this kind of, I don't know if it's joy when she, helps to heal people. And my sister Ellen is a chemist, researcher, and professor at University of California, Irvine. And she is doing amazing work and is well known all around the world for her work. And just an amazing mother and grandmother. So, yeah, I have something to live up to.
I think you're doing a great job. I mean, you're a wonderful person. I can see it the second I pulled up and just saw you, even though I could only see your eyes. There's just that light in your soul. And I mean, your mom has to be just so proud and excited. And I'm so excited to be a part of that and to do what I can. And so I want to, again, just thank everybody for being here and thank you for your support. And just reach out to me. And if you have any questions, if this is going to be a fluid thing. And so I am there for you. And I know through me, if you need to ask any questions of Allis, we can do that. And I think there are going to be some really fun things going on. And in fact, maybe a couple new documentaries or, a screen, play, something. There's so much meat here. And I want to say a couple of the people in chat have tried to go to the website, andruffle.com, and it appears that there are a couple links that are broken. And so, so we will get, we'll get on that and we're going to get it going on. And it's just fun. And I just want to say again, thank you. This is an uplifting show. It is much needed. There is hope. There is beauty. There is, good research out there. And like I said, we're all going to do it together. And I feel so blessed. I do. Thank you so much for being here. Now I can't wait to go hang out with Gordon.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
Yes, thank you so much. And all of you, stay tuned. Next week will be another great show. I will have many stories to tell you from this weekend. And so I just want to thank all of you for being here. Thanks to Michael for being here and a few new people that I can see in chat. This is really awesome. Spread the word. And again, Mario, I am thinking of you and your family. Thank you. Have a wonderful and safe weekend. And we will catch you next week.
Just really struck me about how the common thread seemed to be deception, but deception of human nature. So that's what I started thinking, who would these folks be? I mean, then I started thinking about the intelligence agencies, what role they could play, and what would be their motivations for getting involved in ufology.
Nice to be in orbit.